So for those of you living in major cities, as I come from New York City, and I'm pretty sure you guys are experiencing the same thing, it's not necessarily just about a bunch of pension funds just around every major city in America building condos or luxury condos or just apartments in general, hoping that there's going to be enough people to rent these things out for inflated prices. And I knew it was a matter of time where the same algorithms we see on social media were eventually going to make their way into the real estate market. And once again, a person who grew up in Brooklyn, especially the last neighborhood I lived in Crown Heights and in Bushwick, I would say they're always building brand new apartments, but at times once they get finished, they don't get rented out for months. And then one day, the whole thing is just rented out in less than 2 weeks. And there was one place by me, they must have built like 50 apartments, a high-rise building too. And they didn't rent that out for a whole year. And then all of a sudden I looked up, less than 2 weeks, they had the whole thing rented out. And come to find out, there's a couple of companies out there, I believe headquartered in Texas, and they're actually putting all of these apartments in collaboration with many different property owners to actually set the market value of what prices to put on the apartments, when to hold back on certain inventory to make it available to the public, and when to release it. And for years, this has been going on in Manhattan, in New York City first, because a lot of those apartments are vacant. But it's slowly made its way down to Brooklyn, especially downtown Brooklyn. A lot of those apartments are empty. There's buildings where I spoke to security guards and they'll tell me most of the building is empty. But a lot of these pension funds, they're sitting on a lot of cash, and they could hold those L's for a little bit. They could take those losses, and eventually they slowly start to release those apartments in the market. And it's one of the factors that are contributing to the high cost of living in a lot of major cities throughout the country. But of course, when it's eventually too late for the public to be aware of this, the media outlets are starting to finally report it, even though they already knew some of this was happening. You guys check it out. Every once in a while, I'll check in.
Tonight, the Arizona Attorney General is calling it a massive scheme landlords are using to raise rent, and it has impacted hundreds of thousands of people in the valley. Today, Chris Mays announced a new lawsuit going after several major property management companies who she claims work together to artificially increase rent prices.
It may be one of the reasons why Arizona is in a housing crisis. Attorney General Chris Mays says this alleged scheme has been going on since 2016.
Money is tight right now for Mila Bazin.
Inflation is just too high for us right now, and it's going way up.
What's also going up for her? Rent.
We moved in 2021, and it was $1,400, and now it's up to $1,785.
Thinking it's just the way it is. But Attorney General Chris Mays claims it may be part of an insidious scheme happening to hundreds of thousands of renters in the valley.
They tricked tenants into paying more for rent than they otherwise would have.
She filed a lawsuit against 9 prominent apartment landlords, including the one that owns Bazin's, and a software company called RealPage Incorporated. They control about 70% of apartments in the Phoenix metro.
You cannot throw a rock in Phoenix without hitting a building that was jacking up rents.
This is how the alleged scheme works. These apartment companies, who are supposed to be competitors, were colluding by giving RealPage their leasing information. RealPage would then put that into an algorithm that told these companies what they should charge, typically 15% or more than other complexes, deceiving tenants into thinking they were getting a fair deal when really it created a monopoly.
This was not a fair market at work. It was a fixed market that harmed renters while driving up the profit margins for this housing cartel.
Mays says it caused renters to pay millions of dollars more in rent.
With the way the world is going, I'm not shocked at all.
Bazin is now...
Imagine how many corporations have now invested into this scheme. Man, there's a lot of companies that provide this algorithm. I'll read off the list in a second.
Considering leaving at the end of her lease.
We're pretty scared to stay here. We don't know if they're going to up it.
But knowing just how many could be part of this, she doesn't know where to go.
Mays says she is seeking restitution in this lawsuit. Meanwhile, we did hear back from one of the companies that denied any involvement in this alleged scheme.
Now here's some of the companies that are providing these algorithms: RealPage, AMC, Avenue 5, BH, Camden, HSL, RPM, and Whittler. My God. But you see, living in New York, especially through the pandemic in 2020, I knew something was up. You know, when you always had that feeling, I knew something was up. And I used to listen to Bloomberg every morning just to hear them advertise to their institutional investors, hey, you could buy real estate in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and then get a huge rate on return on some of these rents. Like, they're advertising these to major investors that have, you know, holding money for pension funds, etc. And all this gentrification, or just, I don't want to really say necessarily gentrification, but just all of these new projects, these luxury rentals, they're all funded by the local fire department union, the teachers union. It's everyday citizens that are funding their own overpricing in their own neighborhood. But let's check out more information on RealPage. I believe that's the main algorithm company that a lot of these high rises in New York City use.
RealPage products are used to set prices on roughly 4.5 million housing units in the United States. That includes the units in this complex, some of which had rents starting at just under $3,000 a month in January 2024.
We've been told as tenants by employees of Equity that the software takes empathy out of the equation so they can charge whatever the software tells them to charge.
That sounds like most of tech. There is no empathy. For all you artists that are doing music and you think it's Spotify and Instagram and all these platforms are helping you out, they got no empathy for none of you guys. Everything is math based. I mean, just if you know anyone in tech, the way they think, there's nothing artistic about anyone that does engineering, tech, or any field similar to those things. There's none at all. So the fact that they're creating all these creator-based platforms, it's a conundrum in itself, but we'll get to that eventually later.
Property managers started to price apartments with RealPage products in the mid-2000s.
It's pretty much unequivocal. Just turning the system on and letting it perform will outperform your manual analyst. There's almost no way it can't.
Jeffrey Roper is the inventor of YieldStar. The product was acquired by RealPage in 2002. Its model was combined with another software, Lease Rent Options, and reintroduced in a new AI tool dubbed AI-RM for short.
So you're going to find large REITs and portfolios out there. Absolutely, it's everywhere. You know, I can tell you from the design of YieldStar, it is not directly looking at what the guy across the street is doing in order to determine my rents. He has pieces falling into vacancy points in time that I do not have.
The company says its software can increase a landlord's revenues by 2 to 7%. RealPage told CNBC that it charges landlords a fixed fee for each unit that it helps manage, regardless of its rent price. What happens with the proceeds is up to private equity giant Thoma Bravo, which acquired RealPage for $10.2 billion in 2021. In court filings, Thoma Bravo claimed that it's not liable for the acts of its subsidiary. The Attorney General in D.C. says local landlords complied with RealPage's recommended prices over 90% of the time. Tenants across the United States have launched numerous lawsuits against their landlords for using RealPage. At least 34 landlords were involved in litigation. In 2023, the Justice Department filed a statement of interest in the class action, arguing that the complaints adequately allege violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
But this is the era that we're in currently right now. The laws are not going to be able to keep up with the tech. The fact that some of these property owners have been doing this since 2005, it shows you that the laws are just way behind. It took COVID, it took inflation, it took the Airbnb kind of causing issues in a lot of major cities as far as the rental market to kind of force governments to take a look at what's going on. And you add on top of that all the homelessness that's going on. Look at all the factors that had to happen for governments to even consider taking a look at this. It leaves you to wonder, just the laws right now are just not really set up to catch up. They're almost 10 to 15 years behind on this.